Hi there, folks. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the background to the tragedy of Hippolytus, also written by Euripides. I'm actually not going to talk too much about the background story because I feel like the introduction that's provided for you by Ian Johnston in his translation is actually really helpful. He gives you the background on who Hippolytus's parents are, where they're living, how Phaedra fits into this story. So what I want to focus on more today is kind of the background of Theseus himself and Phaedra, her backstory, because I feel like that both of those relate to understanding our play a little bit better, but it won't be too heavy into plot details or story details. Unlike the story of the Trojan War, the story of Hippolytus is actually pretty contained. It's more of a family drama than a international drama, so to say. The scope is a little bit smaller. So even though Theseus is quite the traveler and he is a hero, a legendary hero, much like Heracles or Perseus, this part of his story is actually a little bit more smaller in scope, and we certainly don't need to be thinking about the death of a generation of young men who are fighting in a war caused by the dissolution of a marriage. This is quite a different story. All right, so let's take a look at who Theseus is. So Theseus is considered a hero in Greek myth. Heroes, for mythological purposes, are usually the sons of a god and a mortal woman. So Theseus' father is Poseidon, the god of the sea, and this will become important at the end of the play. But Theseus' past, before we get to Hippolytus, the story of Hippolytus, and we see him as a man who's married to Phaedra and has children with her. Theseus' past is actually pretty rich, and in some cases kind of salacious. So what you're looking at on the left is it's a Greek vase that's basically a large drinking bowl. So this is a very wide, very flat, very shallow, I guess is the word I should say, a very shallow bowl. In the center of the bowl, you'll see a man holding a knife and pulling at the head of what looks like a bull. And this is Theseus completing his most famous deed, which is killing the Minotaur. And we'll talk about who the Minotaur is momentarily. Around the outside of the center, we see, it's kind of like a comic strip where we see one person, our hero here, who's usually depicted nude or semi-nude without a beard and sometimes wearing a little headband. We see him completing all of these different deeds. So in this case, he's doing something with a large cow, or not a cow, I'm sorry, a large boar, a sow, a female boar. And then in some other instances, he seems to be fighting with men. Over here, we have a bull. These are making references to the 6 labors of Theseus. So you might be familiar with the 12 labors of Hercules. Theseus also had similar stories where he traveled around Athens, his home city, and the suburbs and the areas surrounding Athens, basically taking care of nuisance animals or men who would try to rob and kill travelers on the roads. So he becomes a sort of local hero because he's keeping the precincts safe, because he's using his semi-godly status for good to benefit the community. So he becomes sort of like the hometown hero, and Athens is always very closely associated with Theseus and all of his deeds. But Theseus gets up to other things. So aside from just saving Athens and keeping Athens and its areas safe, he also does a fair amount of traveling. So he has his son Hippolytus based on a trip that he takes out to the far reaches of the known world, where he encounters the Amazons. Now, the Amazons are a group of women warriors, female warriors, who live on the edge of the known world in ancient Greece. They do not live with men. They choose to live apart, and they learn how to become warriors. So instead of learning the more traditional female arts of weaving and homemaking and caring for children, the Amazons essentially take on a masculine role where they try to become very powerful warriors, and they live in a society that's really sort of ordered by warrior values. So there's lots of different authors who talk about the Amazons and who have kind of outlandish ideas of how they live their lives and some more realistic ways of how they live their lives. But basically they are sort of like mythological creatures themselves because they are so unlike other women. And because they seem so foreign and so strange, many authors treat them almost like monsters. Not necessarily in a bad way all the time, but just as so strange and so foreign that they're almost unrecognizable as women or unrecognizable as humans. Theseus goes on this trip and he encounters the Amazons, and he forms a relationship with one of them named Hippolyta. In some stories, she's one of the queens of the Amazons. And he and Hippolyta actually try to have a life together. They have this son. He tries to bring her back to Athens with him, but all of her Amazon sisters think that she's being abducted, and they attack Athens, and there's a war between the Athenians and the Amazons because of this. So Hippolyta and Theseus are never really able to make a life together, and when the story Hippolytus begins, Hippolyta, his wife, is already dead, and Theseus has remarried and has married a Greek woman who's much more like what you would expect a hero to be attached to, not a strange foreign woman. So the image I'm showing you here is actually an image of Penthesilea fighting Achilles. So we're going back to the Trojan War again. Penthesilea was another one of these famous warrior women. Okay. Other aspects of Theseus's past relate to the time that he spends on the island of Crete. Crete is a large, very, very large island right to the south of the Greek mainland, and its most famous king was King Minos, Minos, Minos. Minos marries a woman named Pasiphae, and Pasiphae is a witch. And I say a witch in the ancient sense, meaning that she has the power of magic. She knows spells and incantations to manage the natural world and bend the natural world to her will. She comes from a family of witches, and when Minos marries her, things seem to go just fine. But somewhere along the line, for whatever reason, either because of Minos' infidelity or because of Pasiphae's infidelity, Pasiphae is cursed by Aphrodite to fall in love with a bull. Okay, so not a mortal man, but to fall in love with a bull. And so Pasiphae, with the help of a famous inventor, constructs what amounts to a cow suit so that she can go out into the field and have sex with this bull and satisfy this desire that she has that's been inflicted on her by the gods. The result of this pairing is the Minotaur. So Minotaur is a mashup of two words, Minos, the king's name, and Tauros, which means bull. So the Minotaur is usually depicted as a half-human, or at least a man with a human's body and a bull's head. So here we have Pasiphae's head is cut off, but a baby Minotaur who's with his mom, Pasiphae, sitting on her lap. And then on the left here we have an image of Theseus killing the Minotaur. So Theseus comes to Crete really with the intention of killing this monster, right? Everybody believes that the Minotaur is a monster. As legend has it, the Cretans constructed an elaborate labyrinth, and in the center of the labyrinth is where the Minotaur lived. So in order for Theseus to complete this task, he had to find his way into the center of the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur. and then find his way back out so that he doesn't get lost inside this maze and die himself. So the person who winds up helping him find his way into the center of the maze to kill the Minotaur is Pasiphae's daughter. Her name is Ariadne. So Ariadne, let's take a look at more of the women of Crete and Pasiphae's daughter. Ariadne is depicted on the left here falling asleep. She helps Theseus because she falls in love with him. So when he arrives on the island and comes to the palace and says, "I'm here to kill your monster that you have in the middle of this maze," Ariadne just thinks that he is absolutely wonderful and falls in love with him and is willing to help him because of the love that she has for him. So what Ariadne does basically is give him a ball of thread so that as he makes his way into the center of the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur, he can find his way back out by rolling up the string as he comes back. Now, Theseus actually takes Ariadne with him when he leaves Crete to go off and start a new life, and he says he's going to marry her. And on the way back to Athens, they stop on the island of Naxos, and just to spend the night before they follow up and continue their journey the next day. And while Ariadne is sleeping, Theseus leaves her on the island by herself. So when she wakes up the next day and realizes she's alone, she begins to panic. But eventually the god Dionysus, who we know from our study of ancient Greek tragedy as the god that tragedies are held in honor of, Dionysus finds her and falls in love with her and takes her off to live with him. So she eventually has a happy ending, but not before Theseus abandons her. So somewhere down the line in his story, Theseus winds up marrying Ariadne's sister, Phaedra. So Phaedra, we don't really know much about her. She doesn't have much of a story of her own outside of the story of Hippolytus. And so this picture on the right, we have Phaedra sitting on her bed or her couch. And again, this small winged creature is an Eros, or a Cupid, a depiction of the god of love. And this older woman here on the left, and we know she's old because of her white hair, is the nurse. So we're assuming that this base painting was probably inspired by the play. All right, this might have been kind of like a souvenir sort of thing that a playgoer could take back with them after they've seen the play. But Phaedra's story, even though she is connected to Ariadne and some of Theseus's other exploits, so to say, Phaedra's story is really just about her marriage to Theseus and her desire for Hippolytus. She doesn't really have much more of a history or much more of a connection to Crete. So this is just some of the stories that are related to Theseus and the women from Crete who are going to pop up in the story. Whether or not they add much to our understanding of the play, I think that depends on how we want to approach the character of Theseus and how he relates to women and how Hippolytus relates to women. So we'll pick this up in class when we meet again. But until then, make sure you write down any questions you have and we'll cover them again in class.